The overall state of society grew during this time. It increased and became more urbanized, healthy, and educated. This nation was forever transformed for the better. This is because the higher production of food and other resources. The growth in education provided a better workforce for business owners, which boosted the economy. Over the course of the Industrial Revolution, mortality rates in Britain fell significantly and people started living longer. This shows how much easier and a better life it was during this time, which, with great advancement in technology, life was way easier to stay alive and live a great life. The new industrial labor opportunities caused a population shift from countryside to cities. This drove businesses in cities, but came with some consequences. The growth of cities led to horrible living conditions. The wealthy fared far better than the industrial workers because they could afford to live on the outskirts of the city. The growth in the population did not help in the living situation for workers. The tiny space for people to live caused issues such as spreading of sickness and child labor. During this time, child labor was providing unsafe working conditions in many factories, which led to reform movements. This gave kids unsafe conditions and took them away from school, but families needed it in order to live.
Population growth during industrialization. Secondary source and reasoning. The population growth between 500 CE and 2000 CE, and how the number has increased drastically from the Industrial Revolution to today. The world has become more urban, therefore there are many more jobs needed now than there was back in the industrialization days. The changes in population and urbanization are related to the Industrial Revolution because more people came into factory areas seeking jobs, causing the areas to urbanize. Therefore, as the areas urbanized, the economy raised and so did the need for jobs. These increased jobs show how the population increased during the Industrial Revolution. With more employees in jobs like dressmaking and tailoring, it can be inferred that more clothes were needed because there were more people. Due to industrialization, more jobs needed to be filled because of new roles in industries. But other occupations had increased employment. Occupations like domestic servant, laborers, dressmaker, and tailor gained approximately 100,000 more employees in 1871 than 1851. These facts and statements about the increased numbers of jobs show how the population increased during the industrialization. Primary source and reasoning. These quotes are about Manchester and how their population and economy changed during industrialization. The whole assemblage of buildings is commonly called Manchester and contains about 400,000 inhabitants, rather more than less. A man who was alive during this time tells you how many people live within the two boundaries of places and how many people are inhabitants of Manchester. The working people's quarter are sharply separated from the sections of the city reserved for the middle class. This simply states that they had so many workers and builders that they had to separate the working areas from the living areas. But all this is nothing in comparison with the courts and lanes which lie behind, to which access can be gained only through covered passages, in which no two human beings can pass at the same time. Of the irregular cramming together of during this time tells you how many people live within the two boundaries of places and how many people are inhabitants of Manchester. The working people's quarter are sharply separated from the sections of the city reserved for the middle class. This simply states that they had so many workers and builders that they had to separate the working areas from the living areas. But all this is nothing in comparison with the courts and lanes which lie behind, to which access can be gained only through covered passages, in which no two human beings can pass at the same time. of the irregular cramming together of dwellings in ways which defy all rational plans, of the tangle in which they are crowded literally one upon the other, it is impossible to convey an idea. There are so many buildings that were made in Manchester due to the increase in jobs, that they soon ran out of room and had to keep just cramming everyone and everything together while still separating lives from their work. Such is the old town of Manchester, and on rereading my description I am forced to admit that instead of being exaggerated, it is far from black enough to convey a true impression of the filth, ruin, and uninhabitableness, the defiance of all considerations of cleanliness, ventilation, and health which characterize the construction of this single district containing at least 20 to 30,000 inhabitants.
The lead up to population growth. The population growth did not just come out of nowhere. There was a whole lead up to it in the first 50 years after the Constitution went into effect in 1789. The population of the United States ballooned at a greater rate than it ever had since. And so basically what that is saying is that this wasn't just out of nowhere, and there was a huge growth before this when people found their new freedom in the US, and then the revolution maybe boosted it and made it even more of a population growth. Next slide. And why? Like, you might think, why did this population growth happen? If it was already happening, how did it get even bigger? And one thing that I looked into when I asked this question was, could it have been medicine? The better medicines in the century could have helped all the sick people become more healthy and live longer, and that would have boosted the age of when they died. And this quote just says, Western aid in medical science spectacularly reduced the high death rates, often by more than 50%. So the new medicines definitely reduced death rates by more than 50%, which is pretty crazy in just a short time. And it could have stopped someone from dying from the flu if they had a pre-existing condition that would have killed them with the flu. It could have made them healthy and they could have lived longer. And then on the other side, as they were being born, the child mortality rate could have dropped also, with more better medicines to keep these children alive from birth until they were able to take care of themselves. And this century, from 1800s to 1919, is often referred to as the pharmaceutical century for this reason.